This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.
Aloha and welcome to the monthly public meeting of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. It's good to see all of you here. The Vegetarian Society of Hawaii is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. From a handful of pioneering founders back in 1990 to becoming one of the largest nonprofit vegetarian organizations in the nation, we've continued to promote human health, animal rights, and protection of the environment by means of vegetarian education. It is now time for our special guest. We're delighted to have with us tonight our own William Harris, MD, a vegan for more than 45 years. Dr. Harris is a founding and current director of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. Prior to his retirement, he was an emergency room physician and the director of the Kaiser Permanente Vegetarian Lifestyle Clinic. He received his medical degree from the University of California, San Francisco, and is the author of The Scientific Basis of Vegetarianism. Tonight, Dr. Harris will present Healthcare Reform, Emptying a Flooded Basement Without Turning Off the Tap. Please welcome Dr. William Harris.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming. I appreciate your presence. I'm talking about healthcare and what the problem is. Maxine on healthcare. Here's Maxine over in the corner. Let me get this straight. We're trying to pass a healthcare plan written by a committee whose chairman says he doesn't understand it, passed by a Congress that hasn't read it but exempts themselves from it, to be signed by a president who is also exempt, hasn't read it, and smokes, with funding administered by a treasury chief who didn't pay his taxes, to be overseen by a surgeon general who is obese, and financed by a country that's going broke. What the hell could possibly go wrong? So while all this flapdoodle was going on about 4 months ago, I was thinking of a metaphor, and this is a metaphor. We were bombarded every night with television talking heads arguing about the best way to empty a flooded basement with a teaspoon without shutting off the tap. And I guess the first thing I should do is explain the metaphor. This is the flooded basement, our incredibly high medical costs. Now, I did this graph back in 1991, and I figured out that a good estimate of the cost of animal food was probably about 1/5 of the US medical budget. And I did this on the basis of food intake data from the Food and Agricultural Organization and plotted against WHO disease data. Cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer in this country, and it is strongly related to the consumption of animal food. Several types of cancer are related to animal food. Osteoporotic fractures probably related to animal food too, because the animal food is high in the sole essential sulfur amino acid called methionine, and that breaks down, releases sulfate. The sulfate carries the calcium in your bones out into your urine. The current medical care budget is about $2 trillion, and 1/5 of that is $333 billion just due to animal food consumption. But that's not the only thing that's happening. Now, this is the tap that has not been turned off, and this is the United States Department of Agriculture giving money to all the wrong products of American agriculture. Now, you can go to the USDA website and you can spend an entire day there and you will never find out what you're looking for, because they've got everything almost in a code that did not originate on the planet Earth. So I went to Environmental Working Group instead, and this is a quote: "With the passage of the 2008 Farm Bill, Congress has devised subsidies that force taxpayers to spend billions of dollars no matter what the condition of the farm economy." So here are the USDA price supports, which I got back in 1987 by digging them out of the hard copy USDA 1989 agriculture statistics. The big winner was obviously feed grain, $16 billion in subsidies for growing stuff that's going to be fed to animals. And I might also add, these are all monoculture crops. And when you plant monoculture crops, you are virtually guaranteeing that you're going to have to use pest control measures to deal with them, because monoculture is always the way you feed the pests. Here are the USDA subsidies in 2004. This is directly from the USDA. And once again, the feed grains come in at the top. I don't really have any idea why they are supporting upland cotton, but once again, it's a monoculture crop, and this is the little creature that likes to live on cotton. This is the cotton boll weevil. And then we have these other foods that would be pretty nutritious. Soybeans, rice, and wheat. Those are good enough foods. Problem is they're giving most of the soybean crop to the food industry, which squashes it down and makes soybean oil out of it and other things that you want to avoid. Dairy always gets about a $2 or $3 billion bailout from the USDA. Then the rest of the stuff doesn't make much sense either. It's not good for you. It's particularly alarming when you consider that almost all the USDA subsidies go to some kind of grain product. They may not feed it all to animals, but the part that they feed to you isn't all that much of a bargain either, because here is 19 grains, typical grains that you eat every day. This is the RDA arrow. If you met 100% of your calories from just eating grains, you would be short in vitamin C, cobalamin, that's B12, vitamin A, vitamin E, calcium, folate, and riboflavin. The only reason we've been using grains for the last 12,000 years is because they're super cheap. You can get 2,200 calories of this stuff for a relative cost of about $1.21. Now, consider the option. If we're eating vegetables, we would be getting food that is only short in vitamin B12, and it's got enough of everything else. That would be healthy food, but that is not the stuff that the USDA is subsidizing. What they do with those subsidized foods, they take stuff that could be pretty good human food, like brown rice, wheat, peanuts, sunflower seeds, and the food industry takes this stuff and it splits it up. It makes sunflower meal, cottonseed meal, peanut meal, wheat bran, rice bran out of these basically good foods, and it feeds them to the animals. The animals get the best part of the deal because, as you can see, the nutrient values for these 6 nutrients are much higher for the stuff that the animals get to eat. On the other hand, the food industry takes these same ingredients and makes white bread, white rice, molasses, seed oils, and sugar, and sells it to you and makes a profit on that. Now, why do the animal foods have to keep getting bailouts? They're invariably bailed out by somebody, and the reason is they can't make it on the free market. And the reason for that is that there are massive inefficiencies in animal agriculture built right into it. If you eat eggs, you're wasting about 75% of the protein in the food that the hen ate, and about 82 or 3% of the calories. And it goes down the line here: milk, chicken, pork, beef, They all have the same problems with losing calories and protein. When you get down to lamb, you're wasting 95% of both the protein and the calories. So this is a really inefficient way to run a railroad or an agricultural system, and that's why the USDA keeps bailing them out. Well, we might ask right from the start, how important is it to pay farmers to grow anything? Here's a guy, a million years ago, and he's got a plant, and he's going to find that all he has to do to make more of the same is poke a little hole in the ground, take a seed from this plant, cover the seed over, put a little water on it, and come back and check it every now and then, and he'll wind up with food. And here's an example of a nice organic garden over on Maui by Stephen Cat Blake, who have been our speakers in the past. It looks like pretty good food to me, and that's going to keep them going for months. It does not require government subsidies. We would not starve if the USDA went out of business tomorrow. We would simply have to learn to do one of the things that is most fundamental in our nature, and that is to be able to plant seeds and then let nature do the work. You're just a passive spectator. All you're doing is kind of protecting the seed while it comes up. Well, I have a few therapeutic axioms here. The first one is no medical nostrum or surgical breakthrough beats not getting the disease in the first place. This is the famous operation known as a wallotectomy. Don't look for magic foods, because the only ones that work are the ones that magically make you sick, and those are animal foods, which are full of cholesterol and saturated fat, and highly processed foods, which are full of God knows what. The next axiom is whole food vegan diet and exercise are the prime determinants of health. And it's not just because this helps you keep your weight down, because the main reason is that it maintains your circulation. Because without circulation, nothing heals. Nothing heals. You've got to have circulation. The next axiom is if man made it, don't eat it. There's a famous book, not a very good book, and it's out of print, so you won't be able to read it. But anyway, if man made it, don't eat it. And here's why. People go into the food industry for one purpose, and that is to make a profit. And they do it by putting fat, sugar, and salt into your food, the most addictive substances known to the human race. And here's a little chief executive officer of this fast food outfit, and he's looking at this stuff and he's thinking, this isn't really very healthy. I shouldn't be feeding this to people. So he takes the fat and the sugar and the salt out of this, and nobody buys it. And the board of directors meets and they put him out on the street looking for a new job, and they find another chief executive officer who is not so scrupulous and doesn't really care what he sells as long as he makes the profit. And that is why you're guaranteed to get the wrong stuff if you use a lot of processed foods. It's very hard not to use some, but do the best that you can. This is the nutrient analysis of this fast food meal. It's short on vitamin E, vitamin A, magnesium, riboflavin, pyridoxine, zinc, vitamin C, dietary fiber, folic acid, and even iron, in spite of the fact there's a hamburger sitting right in the middle of it. So if you wanted to expand this diet so you got the most limited of the nutrients here, you'd have to eat about 5,500 calories of this stuff, but you only need 2,200. So you've got 3,000 left over, and the general consensus is that it takes about a mile of running to work off each 100 calories. So you'd have to run about 30 miles to undo the extra calories you'd pick up from eating nothing but fast food. The next axiom is if it has no fiber, don't eat it. And right now I want to tell you that macronutrient ratios are irrelevant. It doesn't matter what percent of calories come from fat or protein or carbohydrate. The important thing is it's got to have fiber. And if it's got fiber, then it's healthy. If it doesn't have fiber, it's either animal foods, which are full of the cholesterol and saturated fat and laundry lists of other things that it takes too long to even talk about, or they are highly refined plant products like refined sugar, a disaster. If you want to get fat in a hurry, eat a lot of white sugar. And vegetable oil, which is an equal disaster, and I'm going to talk about both of these. Now, sometimes people worry about eating avocados, but avocados have fiber. Grams of fiber, about 38 grams of fiber in 2,200 calories of avocado. I wouldn't advise anybody to try to eat that much avocado, but the reason there's fiber in avocados, here's a microscopic picture of some cells in an avocado. And all of these little circular structures are the cell wall of the avocado, and those are made out of fiber. And you cannot digest fiber because it's made out of cellulose. We don't have the enzyme cellulase that makes it possible to digest cellulose, so the avocados still have the fiber. And nuts and seeds are also plenty high in fat, and the high carb, low fat boys will say you should never eat either of these things. And I'm saying it doesn't matter because you're getting fiber. And then when you get out here to the really important foods, which also happen to be the ones that the USDA never subsidizes, you got tons of fiber. And those are very healthy foods because they got just about everything else. This is the US corn usage from 2010. This came right from the horse's mouth, the USDA. And you can see that the usage, 60% of it is going to make ethanol for fuel, and about 30% for livestock feed. And then this little demon down here that I'll say more about, high fructose corn syrup. And since it's a monoculture crop, you are going to be dealing with the corn leafworm, so it means that you got to use some chemical control for the corn. Let's talk about ethanol as a fuel. Here's a good cartoon. The corn farmer, America's great hope to cure our addiction to oil. So why is this man smiling? Because it takes 1.29 gallons of fossil fuel to produce 1 gallon of ethanol. So we're getting a double whammy here. We're not only wasting fossil fuel to grow the stuff, but ethanol is not really a clean burning fuel. It may be a little better than gasoline, but it still puts a lot of stuff out in the atmosphere that we don't want. Here's a shot of the Mississippi Delta. All of that agriculture waste coming down the Mississippi River spreads out on the Mississippi Delta. And this green stuff here is the massive algae bloom that has been caused by all the contaminated substances coming down from American agriculture. It's not just corn, a lot of it is animal manure and waste. And this is the Gulf of Mexico before the brilliant boys at BP decided to drill an oil well 5,000 feet down in the Gulf without any recognition of Murphy's Law. So they didn't have any backup when they did that. Well, we really need to get off the whole idea of burning anything for energy. There is no excuse. I have to admit this is a bit of a digression, but there's no excuse for particularly people driving cars to use fossil fuel. Coal and petroleum are the fossil fuels, and these are the result of ancient photosynthetic processes that took place in the chloroplasts of green plants maybe billions of years ago. Plants were eaten by the animals. The plants and the animals both died subsequently, and gravity and geological forces and time turned those photosynthetic materials into these combustible fossil fuels that we have to get away from. They're destroying our atmosphere, destroying our environment. By contrast, if you use current sunlight, the stuff that's coming in from the sun all the time, you can drive solar panels, wind farms, actually even hydroelectric dams and wave generators. Everybody see how that works? The wind causes the windmills to turn, and the wind is generated by solar heat. Solar heat also evaporates the water from the large water sources, and then it backs up behind the Hoover Dam, and they've got turbines in there. And you can also put in wave generators. So we ought to really get away from using ancient sunlight. The only reason that all of us are here is the sun. We're made out of ancient sunlight, or I'm made out of ancient sunlight, let's put it that way. Most of you are relatively current sunlight. Now this guy, Robert Lustig, has a really good video up. You can find it at YouTube at this address. He is a professor of pediatrics at the University of California, which is my old alma mater. So he's not a quack, but he is saying that high fructose corn syrup is one of the disasters of modern agriculture. And he describes this as the perfect storm. Back in 1972, we were apparently on the shorts for food, and Nixon and his ag secretary, Earl Butz, promised cheap food so that Richard could get reelected. High fructose corn syrup came on the market, actually 1975, which is half the price of sugar. Well, about 1970, I think the USDA, AMA, and the American Heart Association called for dietary fat reduction. Did it work? Well, he doesn't think it did. And Lustig criticizes Ansel Keys, who is an epidemiologist from the University of Minnesota, who started the whole high carb, low fat thing. And the reason he did that is because he failed to do proper statistical analysis on both fat intake, which incriminated fat as a risk factor for CHD, and sugar. And if he had corrected for both the fat and the sugar, he probably would have decided that the sugar was as much a culprit as the fat. So here's what Lustig says about HFCS. It gives you fatty liver hypertension, inflammation, insulin resistance, leptin resistance, which means that you won't be able to tell when you've had enough to eat, and resulting in obesity. He says it's alcohol without the buzz. Now we know that the FDA regulates alcohol, but it won't regulate this stuff. Here's a graph of the intake of high fructose corn syrup. It's going up since 1974. It wound up in the soda pop first, and then it kind of migrated into almost all the processed foods. And you might all go home and take a look in your collection of processed foods and find out how many of them have got HFCS. And here's the obesity rate in the same period. This is the number of people who were obese up to 1976, and after the fructose corn syrup came on the market, started going up like that, and we're now about 60% fat. Well, how come? What's wrong with fructose? It's fruit sugar. As far as I always thought, it was perfectly harmless. The big advantage to the fruit in having fructose is that it's got a sweetness index of 173, whereas glucose is only 74.3. Well, why should the fruit be interested in that? Because the fruit is using us animals as a reproductive strategy. We eat the fruit, and then we spread the seeds all over the landscape. So the fruit tree gets into much more of the environment that it otherwise would be able to do. Now, there's nothing wrong with fructose as you get it in fruit. The problem comes when you start messing around with it. Now, this is sucrose, which is a combination of glucose and beta fructose. So glucose we've got a good use for. It's basically the stuff that runs our metabolic machinery. It's a 6-carbon sugar, and you split it in half and turn it into pyruvate, which then enters the Krebs cycle, and after the Krebs cycle goes through 2 cycles of very complicated enzyme procedures that would take the rest of the night to explain, you get out 29 molecules of ATP, which is the energy currency of the body. It's adenosine triphosphate. You get some carbon dioxide and water at the bottom also, and so it's pretty clean burning stuff. On the other hand, if you take fructose, which is a 5-carbon sugar, and run it into a cell and mix it around in all the enzymes, it gets stuck. It can't get out, except it lets out a little VLDL, very low density lipoprotein. Anybody recognize that term? That's the stuff that your doctor will tell you to try to keep to a minimum because it increases your risk for heart attacks. Now, I graduated from a high school here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and this was the Pennick and Ford corn processing plant on the southwest end of town. I was on the northeast end, and when the wind was blowing the right direction, this was my nose. This is a combination of sickeningly sweet and disgustingly sewage-like odor. This is what happens when you take perfectly innocent corn, which is good to eat, and you grind it up and you turn it into corn oil, which is a disaster, and you make feed products out of it, and then you come over here and do a little more fussing around and you get alcohol and beer chemicals, and finally you get dextrose and fructose. Well, at the time I was there, they weren't making high fructose corn syrup, they were just making corn syrup, which is bad enough, but the high fructose corn syrup is what's doing it now. So now we get to the question, why does a salad cost more than a Big Mac? And here is what the USDA and the Food and Nutrition Board recommend. Mostly grains, vegetables, and fruits, a little bit of protein and sugar, oil, and salt, minimum amount up here. Here, in fact, is what we are eating, mostly meat and dairy down here, 73%, some grains up here, sugar, oil, and starch, too much. Up here at the top, the stuff we should really be eating, vegetables and fruit, and you hardly see it, it's 0.37%. Subsidizing, and we are subsequently eating. And this is the food pyramid turned upside down, but in its actual form. Americans are eating this tiny amount of fruit down here and some vegetables, but up at the top, 39% is dairy. I don't know how many of you saw this when Peter Jennings of ABC News ran it. Investigative report called How to Get Fat Without Really Trying. And if you search the YouTube, you'll be able to find this online because somebody put it up there. I asked permission from ABC to put it at our website, and they said no, it's under copyright, so you can't use it. But this is their version of the subsidy pyramid. Fruits, vegetables, and grains that humans eat are about 170 million in subsidies. Dairy, meat, and sugars and fats get 3.8 billion. Now, if you like watching people squirming while they're being interviewed, I highly recommend that you watch this somehow, because the first guy that he interviews is Tommy Thompson, who at that time was the Secretary of Health. Jennings asked him point blank, why try to do anything about the health situation until we do something about this garbage that the USDA is pushing on us? And Thompson said, well, I don't see anything wrong with it. That's the first thing he said. I think that's perfectly okay stuff. So Jennings asked him again, why don't you do something about this? If you're head of the Department of Health, why don't you fix the problem? And he said, well, that's not my job, that's Congress. Congress has to pass on the food bill. He essentially sloughed his responsibility to Congress, which is a neat way to do it, because as you all know, Congress never does anything that goes right. Listening to the food industry guy squirm was the most fun, because he said, and this is what the food industry characteristically says, and that is that Americans are getting fatter because they don't exercise, right? We don't get enough exercise. Well, if you drink one Coca-Cola, you're going to pick up 140 calories, and according to the formula I already gave you, that's going to make you have to go run 1.4 miles to get rid of those totally empty calories. There's nothing in Coca-Cola or any other soft drink that has any value except it makes you maybe feel a little better and possibly hydrates you. This is how it all started. This guy back in 1862 created the USDA. The Department of Agriculture went to cabinet level in 1889. The next bad thing that happened is World War I came along, and American farmers cleaned up on the European market. European agriculture had pretty much closed down because people were shooting at each other on their farmland. And the next thing that happened was the war ended, and the farmers screamed bloody murder because their prices had come back down. They couldn't get all that money from Europe anymore. So they went to Congress and virtually bullied Congress into creating something called parity, which means that the farmers are entitled to monies equivalent to the salaries that city workers. The next big event was the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, caused by those same farmers who insisted on growing monoculture crops and overgrazing, which caused the topsoil to blow away, and we had a dust bowl. There was a dust storm that stretched all the way from Oklahoma to New York, and John Steinbeck wrote The Grapes of Wrath on the basis of the miseries of the farmers. I'm sympathetic to the farmers, but they did it to themselves. They were growing the wrong plants, and they were overgrazing. So to make up for that, in 1933, Roosevelt created the Commodities Credit Corporation, which was supposed to give money to help poor farmers. In 2010, most of the money now goes to rich, not poor farmers who are making more than thee and me. If you really want to get the skinny on this, go to Amazon and buy this book. You can get it for about 1 or 2 cents now, so you'll be paying more for the postage than the book. But anyway, this is The Farm Fiasco by James Bovard, a rather radical libertarian writer. How federal agriculture policy squanders billions of dollars a year, sacrifices the poor to the rich, and gives congressmen and bureaucrats vast arbitrary powers over American citizens. The next guy that we need to blame a little bit is Ulysses Grant. He followed Abraham Lincoln into office, and Grant caused the coining of the term lobbying because he used to hang out in the Willard Hotel in Washington, and every morning he'd go downstairs and smoke a cigar, and various supplicants who wanted special favors from the government would come down and bend his ear. According to the Center for Responsible Politics, in 1999, the lobbyists got about $1.42 billion for representing special interests, not us. And it's probably up to about $2 billion by now. So now we have a vicious cycle. We can tell that this is a vicious cycle because it's got teeth. And the USDA's unhealthy food vicious cycle starts here. USDA subsidies for bad food, that decreases the price of the bad food, increases the consumption of the bad food, and that leads to higher profit margins for the people that are growing and processing the bad food. So they plow the profit margins into advertising and Food and Nutrition Board education, quote unquote. They get IRS tax deductions that amount to about 1/3 of the advertising that they do. As we all know, the media is driven by advertising revenues. You'll get 5 minutes of news, and then you get 5 minutes of advertising. You get 5 minutes of John's other wife and 5 minutes of advertising. So if you are a health reporter, such as one that we have in town, working on one of our TV stations, and you run all of these stories about the new medical breakthroughs and how bad our health care is, you can't say what the solution is because you're hemmed in on both sides of your portion of the TV by ads from Wendy's and McDonald's and Burger King And if you say anything about those institutions as a source of some of the ill health that we have, you'll be out looking for a new job. So the long result is the media does not tell us anything that we really need to know about how to get healthy. It only tells us about piecework ways to fix the things that are already busted rather than trying to keep them from getting busted in the first place. So because we don't have that free media, we get more sickness, more wailing over healthcare costs, and then you go back up, you DCA all quota, and you start all over again. So this is the USDA's unhealthy food pyramid. And the end result is Michelangelo's David as sculpted by the USDA, the Food and Nutrition Board, and the IRS. Okay, now I want to talk a little about fatty acids. I did this last time, so I'm going to try to keep it short. I reviewed this book for the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and the thing that really stuck in my head was that in primitive times, pre-agricultural times, the ALA ratio in the primitive diet was 1-to-1. LA is linoleic acid, the first of the omega-2 fatty acids, and ALA is alpha-linolenic acid, the first of the omega-3 fatty acids, and in fact the only essential omega-3 fatty acid. Now what happens? Why is it that our ratio in the diet is now 10 LA to 1 ALA? And I think I know the answer. The first answer was the agricultural revolution, which put us on the track of eating almost entirely grains. We're still running a grain-based agriculture, which is stuffed full of LA, linoleic acid. It has very little alpha-linolenic acid, ALA. Now, plants can take LA directly to ALA without having any, well, they've got it built right into them. The problem is that the plants don't start making ALA out of LA until the seed germinates. So when you're eating seeds, which is what grains are, you're going to get a whole lot of LA, and you don't start getting much ALA until you start eating the germinated seed, which we call vegetables. Now there's a big problem here. The LA goes directly to arachidonic acid, and you have to have the same enzyme, delta-6 desaturase, to go from LA to AA, arachidonic acid, as you have to go from ALA to EPA, which is the famous ingredient in fish oil that is supposedly capable of protecting you against heart attack. Problem with that is that EPA also increases the risk of having a stroke. So you're trading off one disease for the other. But the fatty acid you really need is this stuff, DHA, because this is a major player in the brain and the retina. So it's essential to your mental function and it's essential to your vision. These are the winners in the ALA sort, and there's really only 4. Flaxseed oil, perilla seed, flaxseed itself, which I would prefer over flaxseed oil, and chia seeds. How many have heard of perilla seeds, if any? Okay, a couple of people have heard of perilla seeds. Go on down to Palama Market. It's right next to Don Quixote. And pick up some of this stuff. It's a nice, tasty, crunchy grain. You can chew on it. It's very small. You cannot chew on flax unless you want to break your teeth. You can chew on chia, and that's also a very good ALA source. The next in line is walnuts, which are frequently recommended as a good source of ALA, but the problem is that they have got more LA than ALA. So the only ones that really work are these 3 top seeds, and they've got a lot more ALA than they have LA. So when I asked the question, what happened? The first part of the answer was the agricultural revolution, which put us on grain-based diet. Second part happened around 1900 when the American vegetable oil industry got into high gear, and this stuff is severely unbalanced. Almost all of it is LA, which is the food you don't want to get. You're already getting stuff full of it. The ratio of LA to ALA in safflower oil is 746. In cottonseed oil, which is what they cook your chips in, it's 181. And corn oil, it's 46. Olive oil, 12. Soybean oil is looking a little better at 8. And canola is getting to look fairly good, except that it's still 100% fat. And flax is the only oil that really has more ALA than LA. So that's part 2 of what happened to our ALA. My advice is don't use vegetable oil. It's 100% fat, and it's the wrong kind of fat. So now there's a big debate among vegans. The question is, do vegans need DHA supplements? And there are those who are pro, including Michael Greger, Joel Furman, Jack Norris, and opposed, Colin Campbell, Jeff Novick, and Pam Popper. And we've had all of those people here except for Pam Popper. Well, the first problem in answering this question is that there are very few clinical labs that can assay serum DHA. And you probably shouldn't pay money for something that you don't need. So you need to get a DHA level to establish whether you need it or not. I can't really tell you where to go. I went to Metametrics and got a spot test, a blood spot test for $108, and it showed that I was in low normal for DHA. But I really would prefer Mayo Medical Labs, but it costs $358, and they do 29 fatty acids on you, and that's about 24 more than I want to hear about. Here are some of the proprietary DHAs that you can find probably at most health food stores. The problem with those are that all of these are made by the Martech Corporation, and they use a hexane solvent extraction process to get the DHA out of the algae that they start with. The problem with DHA is that some of it will retroconvert to EPA, and if you're an elderly person, you may find that when you start taking this stuff, you begin to bruise very easily. That can also happen to you if you eat a whole lot of flaxseed oil, and I've had both of those experiences. So I don't use either of them. And my answer to the question of whether vegans need DHA supplements is don't use vegetable oil, because that's what is messing up your fatty acid ratios. Well, we're on to another topic now. How many people think we've got a vitamin D deficiency in this country? If we really have a vitamin D deficiency, then why do we have it? There's not much prehistorical evidence that any of our distant ancestors had any trouble with vitamin D, and that term sticks in my craw, so I'm going to call it D from now on. The reason I object to it is that it is not a vitamin. It is a pre-hormone. It doesn't look like a vitamin, it doesn't act like a vitamin, it looks like a hormone, and it acts like a hormone. And in all life forms that are able to make this stuff, it starts with this reaction. Cholesterol. You remove a hydrogen from the B ring of the cholesterol, that makes the B ring unstable, so that when an ultraviolet photon of a wavelength of about 300 nanometers comes in, it breaks that B ring and it opens up and forms the so-called vitamin D3. You can see this is just like cholesterol, except the ring has been broken right here. So it's always created from enzymatically changed cholesterol and by ultraviolet light in animals, algae, and mushrooms. It's present, but it is not created in fish. I can't tell you why it's in the mushrooms, but the reason it's in the fish is the bottom rung in the marine food chain is algae, and the algae make all of the omega-3s. And the famous source of D is cod liver oil. Here's a cod. That looks like a pretty top-of-the-line predator to me, and I don't think it's eating just krill. It's probably eating every fish that will fit in its mouth. Here's me, about 1936, and that's our teacher passing out the weekly tablespoon of cod liver oil. How many people have had the experience of drinking cod liver? Okay, I'm glad to see that there are others in my age group here. As you may recall, it didn't taste too good. I have agreement from at least one person out there. So I am saying hooray for the dairy lobby, because that was about the same time as the dairy lobby started putting D into milk. And why did they do that? The reason is that the only real selling point for milk is that it's got a lot of calcium in it. And why does it have a lot of calcium? It has a lot of calcium because a calf has to go from 75 pounds to 1,000 pounds in 2 years, whereas a human infant goes from 8 pounds to 30 pounds in 2 years. So that means that calf has got to grow a big skeleton real fast, and it's going to need to take in a lot of calcium. So here we have milk, good source of calcium, I have to admit that, but it's missing something. It doesn't have much vitamin D. In fact, there is more vitamin D in human milk than there is in cow's milk. So if you really want to sell milk, you're going to have to figure out a sales gimmick, and vitamin D was the sales gimmick for the milk company. And that's why I'm saying hooray for the dairy lobby, because after that I didn't have to use cod liver oil anymore. I haven't a clue why mushrooms make D, but they do. And algae make D because it acts as a calcium regulator for them, and it may be a photon sink as well. And fish get it from the algae, and they use it as a calcium regulator. I don't know what the mushrooms are using it for. Most animals get it from cholesterol and ultraviolet radiation, and for the animals it's a calcium regulator, but it also prevents a laundry list of serious diseases. So where's the evidence that our prehistoric ancestors had problems with a D deficiency epidemic? Well, there isn't any. We evolved in the Serengeti around the old Divide Gorge, and this is tropical Africa. We were originally endowed with very deep pigmentation, which protected us from the excess sunlight that we were getting. Then we moved out of Africa and migrated north, and as we went north, we got progressively whiter in pigment. We lost our pigment, and the reason was the pigment was interfering with the synthesis of D, which we needed. And then eventually we radiated everywhere across the Bering Straits there, got into North America and so forth. Well, here's the problem. D production peaks at the same wavelength as ozone, sunscreen, and melanin, which is the pigment in your skin. So we've got a conflict of interest here. That's why we have the disease known as Rickets. There's a couple of good ways to produce it. Purdah is one. Anybody know what Purdah is? It's the Islamic and to some extent Hindu tradition of keeping women out of the sight of men by hiding them in burqas or keeping them indoors. And that may be a good idea for the men, but it's not so good for the women because they give birth to rachitic children, kids with rickets, and they look like this. They've got bad deformities in the knee, deformities in all areas of skeletal growth. And there's a particularly illuminating article called Rickets. It was written in 1970. It apparently escaped the attention of almost everybody in the nutrition biz because they continue to talk about it as a vitamin. But his summation was, although it's still widely regarded as a dietary deficiency disease resulting from a lack of vitamin D, it results in fact from a lack of sunlight. In smoky cities, it was the first air pollution disease. Do you suppose that might be still the cause of rickets? Well, this guy has quite a bit to say on this. This leprechaun-like individual was formerly a professor of dermatology at the Boston University School of Medicine. But guess what? He was recommending that people get outside in the sunlight to make their own D. And guess what happened next? He got canned. He was drummed out of the Corps, and he was tossed out of the Department of Dermatology. And fortunately for us, he moved over to the Department of Endocrinology and is now probably the world's leading authority on D. And after reading a lot of his work, I have to say that about the only thing I really disagree with him about is that he still calls it a vitamin. It's not a vitamin. And he kind of admits it, but he keeps using the term. He points out that there are D receptors, vitamin D receptors, in most body tissues, and they reduce the risk for rickets, osteomalacia, that's adult rickets, osteoporosis, reduces the risk for diabetes, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, colon cancer, prostate, breast, ovarian, esophageal, non-Hodgkin lymphoma cancers. It also reduces the risk for rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, and fibromyalgia. And all you need is about 10 to 15 minutes a day in the sun without sunscreen, just enough to get some little redness in the skin, and you can make all the D you need. Now here's another player in the game. It's ozone. Ozone, as I pointed out, absorbs wavelengths at the same length that allow us to make our own D. And we've got two kinds of ozone. We've got ozone up in the stratosphere. That's a pretty good thing because it's shielding us from excessive amounts of ultraviolet radiation. But now we're digging holes in the ozone layer by sending all our CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, up into the atmosphere, where they react with the ozone and break it down. So we're getting ozone holes in places like Antarctica. But there's another kind of ozone. It is created by oxygen and smog interacting with sunlight down in the troposphere, which is the surface layer. I think you can probably all imagine that there's a good deal of ozone in that gunk that people are living in. This is the EPA's data on areas in the country that have more ozone than they should. The ozone is in brown. You can see that the major clusters of ozone are up on the East Coast. There's some up here in California as well. The yellow areas are partially contaminated. The only areas that are okay on ozone are these green areas. Ozone interferes with the production of D. Well, guess where all of the literature on D deficiency is coming from? Boston. That's where Hollick works. That's where one of our very excellent speakers, Paulette Chandler, works. And she's black, so she is seeing a huge amount of D deficiency in the form of rickety kids. Now the nice thing about it is, if you can get the kids out in the country, you don't have to give them D supplements because they get over their rickets by just being in the sun. And the British found out about this in the last century, and it's still true. This is the ozone concentration. It's highest when it's red, and this is the Boston area. This is Cape Cod here. Now, before you all go out and buy D supplements, consider the following. I know of an individual who went vegan a long time ago, and he'd been so thoroughly brainwashed by the dairy industry that to make sure he got not only enough calcium, which was one of his worries, but D, he went out and scoffed up some Viostrol, which is a product by Park Davis. And the D content of Viostrol is 50,000 international units per teaspoon. And he figured, since he knew nothing about nutrition, that if a little bit of something is good for you, twice as much will be twice as good for you. So this is an overdose of D. During World War II, they stopped supplementing D in England because they were getting brain-damaged kids from just 2,000 international units a day. And that's all taken right from Schill's Modern Nutrition. So, my advice to you before you start playing around with D at all, remember the best way to get it is moderate sun exposure. If you start burning, then you're putting yourself at risk for a couple of common types of skin cancer, namely basal cell cancer, which is pretty easy to take care of, and squamous cell cancer, which is a little harder. So the one that you don't want to tangle with is malignant melanoma, because that has a pretty high fatality rate, and it has always been thought that melanoma is a risk of being out in the sun too much. Well, there's a study from Australia indicating that the exposure to sun actually reduces the incidence of melanoma. Okay, so here are the conclusions of my talk. First of all the essential nutrients are made by plants, not by animals, so if you eat animal food, you're just getting secondhand nutrition. Secondly, if man made it or it has no fiber, don't eat it. That's going to be a hard one to follow, and I can't say that I do it myself, but do the best you can. The USDA, the Food and Nutrition Board, and the IRS are the cause of our high medical costs because they are bailing out the worst foods in American agriculture and giving no price supports to the foods that even they admit we should be eating. They're telling us to eat fruits and vegetables, and they're bailing out the meat and dairy lobby. Vegans may be short on DHA. If so, it's most likely due to 1, the agricultural revolution, 12,000 BC, the American food oil industry, 1900 AD. The solution to that one is stop using vegetable oils because they're 100% fat, and their LA competes with LA for delta-6 desaturase. This is DHA. 6, have your vitamin D and omega-3 level checked if you can. If low, consider more sunlight first, and if that doesn't do the job, then you may have to take D supplements or DHA. But be cautious because both vitamin D and omega-3s can be toxic. Well, you've been a very good audience, and I thank you for coming.
Thank you, Dr. Bill Harris, for a truly wonderful talk. Thank you very much for coming, and have a safe return home. Mahalo.
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.